Hey guys, this is Mr. Ray, coming here to talk to you today about imperialism in Southeast Asia and the Pacific. Imperialism is defined as a policy of extending a country's power through diplomacy or military force. This trend took the wealthy nations of Europe by storm, making them scramble to pick up land all over the world, especially in the lands of Southeast Asia and the Pacific. Before imperialism began in the 1600s, most of the countries in the region were independent, with only some European merchant footholds. After it began, however, Western countries like Spain, France, Germany, and England used modern armies and technologies to colonize and take control of the countries of Southeast Asia. The wealthy capitalist nations of Europe had many reasons for the imperialization of Southeast Asia, namely these three reasons. The first being land. Power-hungry monarchs in control of these European nations had money, military presence, and technology. The only thing they lacked was an abundance of land, something easily remedied by the colonization of territories in less developed areas of the world. This solution was expensive, yet well worth it for those monarchs. The second being raw materials. Raw materials were assets that auxiliary land afforded to the monarchs of Europe. This was very important to them because they were industrialized nations in desperate need of resources. The third being political and religious influence. This is a given, as monarchs, especially those heavily Catholic monarchs, wanted to spread their religion via the use of missionaries. Now, let's talk about the countries in charge of the colonizations of these regions. The first people we'll be talking about are the Dutch. Early in the 1600s, the Dutch started to gain control of the Spice Islands in the East Indies, which is nowadays Indonesia. Although they faced some rebels and uprisings, they slowly extended their control of the region. Next up are the British. They expanded eastward from India in the early 1800s and defeated the Burmese people. Later, they also expanded southward through the Malay Peninsula. They also occupied Singapore, which later became a really important trade center for the transportation of rubber and tin from their colonies. Next up are the French. They expanded to Southeast Asian mainland from the 1800s onward, and they've begun to win converts in what is known today as Vietnam. The French people sent missionaries to spread Christianity to their controlled regions. Next, we are talking about the regions that were colonized and how they dealt with imperialism. Some of the controlled people, like the Burmese and the Vietnamese, fiercely attacked their Western influencers because they had underestimated Western technology. Every time the colonies rebelled against the invaders, it provided an excuse for them to attack the region and gain even more control. The Western powers enslaved people in Southeast Asia and the islands to work for them so that they can produce more rubber and tin. For them to make more money. There is also one special part of the Asian continent that was not conquered by Western powers, and that is Siam, which is nowadays Thailand. During that time, Siam was located between the British and the French colonies. It stays independent partly because the region learned from Vietnam and Burma's mistake and did not underestimate the Western technology and armies. They did not attack the West and avoided incidents that might provoke an invasion. Siam had also modernized themselves, including reforming the government, modernizing the army. They hired Western experts for their technology, and they abolished the slavery system. Their students also studied abroad. Another important advantage of the region is that it was located between the British and the French colonies. Both the British and the French saw the advantage of making Siam a neutral zone between them to avoid conflict. So at last, they both certified and guaranteed the independence of Siam. Another place where imperialism was present was in the Philippines, which were taken over by Spain in the 1500s. Catholic missionaries were used to to spread Christianity among the Filipinos, which led to the Catholic Church gaining enormous power and wealth. The Filipinos accused the church of abusing its position, and the resistance was started in the late 1800s by a man named Jose Rizal. He called on Filipinos to use nonviolent means to win their reforms. Rizal was later captured and executed by the Spanish, although its actions inspired Filipinos that were eager to free their country. The United States became involved in the conflict going in the Philippines due to the Spanish-American War, which took place due to Cuba's efforts to win independence. American battleships were used to destroy the Spanish fleet, which was stationed in the Philippines. The Filipinos seized this moment and declared their independence from Spain. Although the Philippines was now independent from Spain, the peace settlement between the Americans and the Spanish put it under American control. The Filipinos, led by a man named Emilio Iguinaldo, rebelled against the Americans and started the Philippine-American War, which lasted from 1899 to 1902. The United States crushed the rebellion and set to modernize the Philippines. An agreement between the U.S. and Philippines promised the Filipinos self-rule sometime in the near future. Next, we will be talking about holdings in the Pacific Islands. Starting in the 1800s, Western powers started to claim the islands of the Pacific. In total, there are mainly 3 parts of the islands: Melanesia, Micronesia, and Polynesia. At first, the American, French, and British ships were looking for bases to take on supplies while they were operating in the Pacific. Next, missionaries moved in. By the late 1800s, nationalist rivalries to claim more and more Pacific islands as colonies. Starting from the USA, they secured an unequal treaty from Samoa, a group of islands in the South Pacific. The U.S. gains advantages such as a naval station and extraterritoriality. Other nations later gained similar agreements. The people on the islands were not happy about the West taking control over them and had a hard time blending with the foreigners that took over them. Take Hawaii as an example. The Hawaiian queen Liliuokalani tried to reduce foreign influence, but she was later overthrown by American planters in 1893. The planters then asked the United States to annex Hawaii, which it did. In a letter written by Queen Liliuokalani of Hawaii in 1897, the major injustices of imperialism are explained in what is a detailed criticism of American policy concerning the matter. Liliuokalani implored the president not to annex Hawaii because it was a clear violation of international law, as it violated treaties with other countries. The treaty proposed would also confiscate around 1 million acres of Liliuokalani's private land, not to mention the land owned by local chiefs. She also pointed out that Hawaiian natives, even the ones eligible to vote, had no say in the future of their homeland. Despite this, the United States annexed Hawaii 1 year later. In 1900, the United States, Britain, France, and Germany had occupied almost every island in the Pacific. Although each island was small in size, they offered a lot of profit to their colonial powers. In Hawaii, for example, sugarcane plantations were very profitable, which encouraged Americans to invest in the Hawaiian sugar industry. On other islands, local resources such as nickel and guano were also very profitable. When imperialist powers settled down on the Pacific Islands, the islands provided very useful ports for their merchant and warships as well. This political cartoon, see? It's a political cartoon. This one was used to show how the United States was taking resources such as sugar from other countries like Hawaii, seemingly without permission. The man in the image represents the United States Senate, and he's reaching over to the island of Hawaii. The man is picking up a barrel of sugar, with a smaller man in the sugar cube sitting on top of it, representing the sugarcane plantation owners relying on the government to support them. Wrapping this up, the imperialist powers colonized the Southeast Asian region and the Pacific Islands because of the great profit they brought to their respective nations. And they also allowed for greater political and religious influence from the West. I really hope this was helpful, guys. Thank you, and have a good night.